Hey everyone, good morning to everyone. Happy Mother's Day. Glad that you're able to join with us as we continue our sermon series on the book of Psalms. I was reminiscing about a trip me and my wife took last year to Portland, Oregon. And one of the things we love to do is we love to create playlists of songs that we enjoy or songs that we like that reminds us of the place. So we drive around, we trek, and with the songs that we created. But then when we get back home, we still play that playlist, and what it does, it reminds us of that trip. Especially now in the last 2 months, we're stuck at home, can't go anywhere. We're playing that playlist, and it's reminding us of the good times and the good food that we had in Portland. And it kind of reminds me of this text that we just read, chapter 121. And this chapter we just read is part of a collection of psalms called the Song of Ascents. And these were songs that the Israelites will sing or pray as they made their pilgrimage to Jerusalem for the annual festivals. So they will play these songs, and there were songs of movement, of journey, of going somewhere. But it's interesting. I think this particular text we just read is actually a callback to an Israelite pilgrimage in the book of Exodus as they were wandering through the wilderness. In chapter 6 of our text, it talks about the sun protecting them by day and the moon by night, almost kind of calling back to Exodus 13, verse 21, where we see the pillar of cloud by day going with them and the pillar of fire by night going with the Israelites as they made their pilgrimage through the wilderness. So for the readers of the psalm, as they're making their way to Jerusalem, there's this corporate recollection of their ancestors making this difficult trek, making a difficult journey through the wilderness. So it's interesting because then it starts out with this question: where does my help come from? As we make this difficult journey, this difficult and hard journey through the wilderness, where does my help come from? The writer is not ashamed to ask this question: where does my help come from? By asking this question, he is telling us that yes, the journey is hard. We need help. The journey is difficult and uncertain. We need help. So yeah, of course, he's assuming that the writer of this is assuming that we need help, but two, that the resources that's available at that time is not nearly enough to remedy their situation. They need to look beyond that. They need to look beyond themselves. And that's why even as he asks that question, where does my help come from? He says, my help comes from the Lord. And for us today, and I believe this is really a word for us today, that as we continue this journey, as we continue to endure the pain and the uncertainty of our times, that we ask that question: where does my help come from? Where does our help come from? Because in so doing, what we do now is, one, we admit our utter helplessness, and two, we acknowledge that there is a higher power that is able to sustain us even in our time of need. Where does my help come from? Yes, one, we are admitting that we are in need of help. Now, often that's a very difficult thing to do. It's so hard to admit that you need help, right? I mean, just imagine, it's hard to tell people, to tell, like, hey, can you help me with this? Can you help me with that? Because you can often feel inadequate. You feel insecure because You just want to be able to do it on your own. But I think there's freedom in admitting that we need help. There is freedom that comes when we're able to humble ourselves and say, no, this is tough. I need help. Because what it does then, it enables us to freely walk humbly before God as we rely and lean on Him to guide us through whatever difficulty we might find ourselves. It changes the way we pray because we can now rest in Jesus. We can now rest in God. That sometimes even now that you don't even have to utter a word, you can just kneel down or just lay down and just be silent. And in that silence, you are praying as you are laying bare before God. But again, it's hard. It's hard to admit that we need help because so often we put up walls, we construct walls and blinders that disable us from our ability to be introspective and see that, oh man, I feel insecure, I feel inadequate right now. And part of the problem too is just, when I think about this, and you might be hearing a lot about just the myth of American exceptionalism. And I think it's something that is embedded within every one of us that has lived here for a long time. We want to be exceptional. And this prevents us from revealing our insecurities, revealing our fears. Even Christians, we love to hide behind the lofty Christian words, the positive thinking words that make us feel like, just rejoice in the Lord always, just be joyful, just be happy, and when you're happy, then it's supposed to somehow disappear. No. Deep down inside, you feel the fear. It's there. It creeps up on you even when you go back to sleep. When you're all alone and you can't sleep, the fear is still there. Often our comforts and our securities prevent us from being, from revealing those fears, from being helpless, being broken. Because we embrace them and we use them to distract us from the lack of control that we're feeling. We use them to numb us from the fears and the realities that we're going through. With them, we're able to dissociate ourselves from the true reality and find ourselves living within the prison of our false security. It's no wonder why so many of us can find ourselves just prayerless. We're so prayerless, we don't need God. We have come to rely on our own abilities. We have come to rely on our own security. So then why do we need to pray? No, we don't have to. Just do what I have to do. Just go about my own business. But when we are in touch with our humanity and in touch with our brokenness, it frees us to rest in God. It is the part that connects us. It's that part that actually unites us with the divine. And that's why Jesus said in Matthew 5, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. For the one who is able to peel the layers of security and comfort and all the layers that we've put on, all the walls we've put around us and strip ourselves bare. That we are given the kingdom of heaven. We are given the presence of God. We are united with Him. And the same thing that David alludes to in Psalm 51. It's like God is not interested in your charades and your sacrifices and you bringing the best and your best prayers. No, God is interested in a broken spirit and a contrite heart. God is interested in us being brutally honest and vulnerable before Him and admitting how helpless we are right now. One of the things you might be asking is how can I do it? How can I be honest? And I I think one of the things we can do is, asking ourselves, how am I feeling? How do I feel helpless right now? Admitting that you feel out of control or out of sorts. Taking an inventory of your own personal lives, your own personal heart right now. And one of the ways you can do it too is just reflecting on your temporality. Coming face to face to God with, coming face to face with your mortality. The reality is, that we are here today, and tomorrow, the next, we may not. That's why David said in one of the Psalms, like, teach me to number my days. Teach me to come face to face with my mortality. Teach me to know that I am utterly helpless. Teach me to be poor in spirit. So we do this by admitting our own personal needs and personal helplessness. And that's one of the ways we do that. The second way we do that is admitting the collective helplessness that we're experiencing even in our world right now. That there are folks around us who are affected by this pandemic. Folks in our community who are affected economically, friends here that have lost loved ones. Knowing that, there's a community experiencing pain and distress right now. We do this also by even acknowledging the events of this last week, where we see the young man Ahmaud Arbery being killed and just left on the ground there to die. This tragic reality of what it means to be a black man in America. Knowing that, we are often perceived as a threat. Knowing that sometimes I have to think about where I can run when I'm away or traveling, or so I have to make sure I think about it. We have to embrace this collective distress and not think that this is somehow some isolated incident. No, this is something that's embedded within the American culture. This evil, this racism that's embedded within this culture. We have to embrace this collective distress. We have to embrace the collective distress of Asian Americans who are experiencing the evil sentiment because of this virus, who are assaulted, who are cursed at. This is evil. But this is a distress that we all must collectively see, that we are helpless. We must admit there is a collective helplessness that we are all experiencing. And as we do this, my friends, we don't just ignore it, as we don't just pull up walls and live in the comfort of our own homes. No, we actually open our eyes and our ears and see that there is a distress that other brothers, other sisters are experiencing. And it's collectively something we experience. as we do this, as we come helpless before God, then we can actually acknowledge that there is someone who can help us. There is someone who can be who's with us, that is guiding us even through this. In verse 2, the writer of this psalm acknowledges who gives help. He says it's the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth, the one who has brought us into existence. It is God who has done this. It is God who can help us. And he is watching over us. He's watching over our coming and our going. He's the one that will not let our foot slip. He's watching us by day and by night. God, the maker of heaven and earth, is watching us. Now, the question you might have is, well, how's God watching over me? How's God watching over me when I lost a job? How's God watching over me when my friends are sick? How's God watching over me when I'm feeling lonely? When I'm afraid I'm going to lose my job? How's God watching me, Craig? How's God watching over me when I've lost a loved one? How's God watching over me? It's the same question I have. The same question that I'm wrestling with. How's God watching over me when this virus has hit so close to home? Well, how's God watching over me when I see politicians use Christians as bait for their agendas? How's God watching over us when in our failed leadership that has politicized this pandemic for their own gain? How's God watching over us? Now, the American Christian will say, well, dear brother, have faith. God is watching over you. Trust God. He can quote the brilliant verses for me. Lean not unto your own understanding. The one without faith will say, well, I told you there's no God. But then Jesus, what would Jesus say? He would weep. He will weep. He will weep with us. He will mourn with us. He will weep. Because he knows. He knows our pains. He knows our sorrows. He knows. He's experienced it. His foot slipped. He was imprisoned all night on a Thursday. He was, then on a Friday, he was crucified in the heat of the day. He knows. So he weeps with us. He mourns with us. But we know that on the third day he was raised from the dead, and he is seated with God in the heavenly places, and he watches over us even now, and he empathizes even with what we are experiencing now. All that Jesus is requiring of us is that we come with our honesty, we come with our vulnerability, and in so doing, we make way for him to help us, to guide us. In this book about prayer by Halesby, he said this. He said, For it is only when we are helpless that we open our hearts to Jesus and let him help us in our distress. It is only when we are helpless that we open our hearts to Jesus and let him help us in our distress. It's only when we actually come to him in our helplessness, and acknowledge that He is God and He is watching over us, that we can actually be truly transformed and changed. There is no need for us to come with our bravado, no need for us to come with all of our accolades and accomplishments, but we come bare before Him, acknowledging that He is God with us. This is my prayer for us. Amen.